Good morning, everyone. It's Pablo Zuanic, Cannabis Equity Analyst at Zuanic and Associates. We have a panel this morning to discuss the next catalyst for the U.S. MSO group. We have Jon Levine, he's the CEO at MariMed. We have Anthony Coniglio, CEO at NewLake Capital Partners. And we have Jim Cacioppo, CEO at Jushi Holdings. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
And to our audience, as usual, I'll be asking the questions. The panel will take about an hour. And towards the end, we'll take questions. You can put them here in the chat room if you're joining via Zoom. I know most of you are joining through Restreaming X. You can also put the questions there, or you can email them to me. Look, just to set the context here, obviously, we're looking at what we think are the positive catalysts that the group has. There are several, in my opinion. We just published a report on that. And we'll discuss them. But we want to set the context here. The president signed the CR, banning hemp derivatives. That happened on November 12th. But stocks in this group fell about 30%, over the few days after he signed, something that, in my opinion, was seemingly positive for the group. MSO SETF fell about 30%. Let's see what, Jim, your view on that. What was the market trying to tell us? Was the market wrong, or what was the market? Why did that happen with stocks?
Sure. Just for the audience background, I have a background. I mean, I came into this as an investor to Jushi. That was my background as running hedge funds, and I've been, trading for virtually my whole career since my mid-20s. So that's my background of why I think I can understand what went on. But so I think he signs this mini bus legislation, which was an ag bill, and included was this ban. And at the time, the market took a downturn, the stock market led by technology, but particularly there was a liquidation of the Bitcoin market. Dealers were getting liquidated. I don't know if these investors follow it, but I don't think you can miss it. Bitcoin's fallen from 125,000 to about, below 80,000. And there was a lot of leverage trades that got liquidated. There were broker dealers who were liquidating accounts. There were all kinds of glitches in the trading system. And I think a bunch of accounts that trade in risk securities got swept up in that, sort of affected like the Russell index more than, the S&P or the Dow. And I think, we got caught up in that. But at the same time, there's this confusion around the hemp industry. I think, I don't know, but it feels like some people thought it was negative for THC. Jushi spent a lot of time, lobbying for this action that took place in the ag bill. Pablo, Trent, he spent a lot of time, on this. It's been an effort of ours, and we viewed it as highly positive to get intoxicating hemp out of the industry. There's just no two ways to look at it. And then in this middle of this bear market, that was happening, driven by Bitcoin liquidations, you then have, I think, a lot of confused analysts, to be quite honest, industry observers who are trying to make something, that trying to figure out what was bad in this hemp bill, or is it coming back? And then you have this noisy hemp industry that's not very well organized. And I just think people were confused. And if you look at it, Senator Rand Paul, brought, as part of this process, I'm looking at my notes here, an amendment to remove the hemp language. Rand Paul did in the Senate on November 10th of 2025. Okay.
Yeah.
It was SA 3941. It was to the amendment 3937 to HR 5357. All these numbers, right? It was tabled by a vote in the Senate of 76 to 24. So more than 2/3. 3/4 of the senators voted against it. So what's happened is people, the hemp industry is confused, like, is it coming back? And it didn't even happen. I was reading this on Twitter. Or X. It didn't happen, and this and that. It's happened. Intoxicating hemp is gone. It's just it was primarily an illegal business. It wasn't tested. The product was lots of times dirty with all kinds of pesticides and mold and mildew. It was sprayed sometimes to get people high by chemicals coming out of China. We've had these things tested. It ran hot. It was actual, very high percentage THC, completely unregulated. And that was just a huge competitor to the legal cannabis business. This business was popping up. It's not just hemp shops. It was all in these smoke shops as well. So it was massive distribution for the illegal market. And in those smoke shops, nothing's age verified, right? And they upsell the clients, which a lot of younger people, to products like nitrous oxide barbiturates, whatever they have in stock, they'll sell in some cases, not all of them, I'm sure, right? And so we got through this massive illegal issue, right? And at the same time, like we saw this in Pennsylvania, one of our markets, law enforcement came in. At Virginia, they came in and closed down a bunch of these things multiple times. There was a big raid out in Colorado for a big producer.
Jim, but hold on one second.
So anyway, so it's massively positive, and the industry took it the wrong way. So
right. Yeah, I hear you. On the same question, why do you think investors took this the wrong way in terms of why did stocks fall for something that in theory was positive, although it's supposed to be a year out, in your opinion?
Yeah, Pablo.
Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that technical glitch. So, listen, this has been really a sell the news type of industry. And so I think an element of this was potentially people hoping that there would be a catalyst and sell the news. There was also a very loud contingent of people who looked at this and said, this is a vote against THC. And I think a lot of people were talking about the 76-24 vote and saying there were 76 senators that didn't support THC. I actually look at it a little differently. I think that people were taking this vote in the context of a government shutdown and wanting to end it and wanting to end gas station, unregulated, untested gas station product.
Illegal, often illegal. I think you can use that word.
Yeah, okay.
It's okay. Illegal. It's okay. I'm not going to get canceled. It's illegal.
And so I think investors are looking at that and saying, wow, those are negatives. And then I also think some people woke up and realized that they never answered the question for themselves, what happens next? And they started to see a really strong pushback from the lobby. And I think that scared some people as well. So you also, I think, need to take it in the backdrop of what's happening more broadly, where we shouldn't be so myopic and only focus on cannabis. I think we should think about what's happening at this part of the calendar from an investor perspective. There's a lot, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of tax loss harvesting happening in a year where people have had meaningful losses in the cannabis industry, but meaningful gains away from it. And this is the time where you can do some tax loss harvesting in your book, get beyond the 30 days and re-enter the position, because most people don't think we'll get a catalyst in the next 30 days. So it's an easy place to go find some losses.
Yeah, I hear you. Jon, any thoughts on the drop in terms of why stocks fell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with Anthony and Jim exactly what they were saying. I think Anthony was heading down the right route when he was talking about the fact that the vote made people worried that THC was not being supported. But I think it's just that they don't understand what the hemp law was and how it was supporting the illegal activity, as Jim's talking about. But I think the bigger concern, which always drives the market, is the fact is with that vote, people started thinking that the rescheduling is going to be even further pushed off or not happen at all. And I think that there are two different things that people don't even understand that part of the market, that the rescheduling and hemp are not the same thing, and that the government still is pushing forward with the rescheduling.
Right. I mean, they're totally different tracks. I totally agree, of course. So, Jim, I'm going to go back to you now. Let's try to quantify the benefits, right? And let's assume that the ban sticks, right? And we're in November 12th, 2026, right? And I'm going to assume for the purposes of this discussion that the problem, it's not non-intoxicating, full spectrum CBD, that's not direct competition, and just, bear with me and with me, and that, Delta 9 drinks are, only tangentially the competitors, that the real issue is this untested, unregulated, unsafe, THCA, hemp, flower, vape, edibles, right? So as you said, gas stations, C-stores, smoke shops, no age gating. Do you have an estimate for how big is this bucket? Because in theory, that would flow to the cannabis industry, to the regulated cannabis industry. It would also have benefits on the pricing side, right? It's a source of price competition. Yeah, I mean, we have numbers from Bo Whitney that, seem very big numbers, and then you have numbers that are much smaller from the guys at RVO Grand Research, the guys at Brightfield. So I myself, have my own estimates, but do you guys have a number in mind? I'll start with you, Jim, in terms of how do you quantify that? Because again, and is there some nuance here? If it's a medical market or like Texas or Florida, or if it's a reg market, does it make a difference, right? We agree that there are benefits, but let's get into a nitty gritty in terms of trying to quantify the benefit. And again, we are November 2026 here.
Yeah. So I spent a career doing modeling and investing in things based upon, financial analysis. I built this company from a business development standpoint based upon all kinds of running models of financial analysis. And so, having given that context, I do not believe this is quantifiable in a modeling sense because it's in a legal industry. By its nature, they don't publish it. When they first did this, it was a loophole, and they started going out, and I don't think there's in terms of the number of shops, it's in a state like Pennsylvania, Virginia's, it's hundreds and thousands of shops. Okay, right. So it's a really, really big problem. So the way that I think to model it would be, is to take an initial headwind off of the industry. So what that might mean is same store sales increases, and I think you're onto something. The difference between states will have different effects, but the headwind comes off and then it turns into a tailwind, right? And I think so. It's like you're playing golf and you're hitting into the wind on the hole, and all of a sudden you turn around and you're side wind, and then you turn around and it's at your back. And then as the day goes along, the wind gets stronger. I think that's what's going to happen is it becomes a positive force versus a negative force. And it's huge. The illegal market is the biggest competitor. So if I look at states, I would imagine again, I'm an investor. I did invest in a bunch of stocks in this sell-off, through my hedge fund One East, which is a big investor in the industry. Okay, I can't invest in Jushi publicly because I'm a control person, but through the public securities, what I'm saying. But if you look at a state like Michigan, right, you would think that, well, there's probably not a huge effect, right? Because the legal market was so competitive. There's really not much of an arbitrage, right? If you take a market like Pennsylvania that's medical, well, there's a much bigger arbitrage because it's just medical and you're serving a much bigger population. If you go to a state that's in between, like a new state like Ohio, for example, it's somewhere in between because they have adult use, but it's not widely. All the stores aren't open yet, so it's not easily accessible. But I'd like to bring up Ohio on one thing in terms of how this affects your numbers, right? A state like Ohio is passing a law, which could be copycat by other states, that makes this go effective in their state in 90 days. Okay?
Right.
So you should track that. And that means this whole 1 year thing is kind of like hard to like quantify as well. Because again, if you're a producer, it's like Croptober. Do you really want a Croptober in outdoor hemp to process for something that ends 2 months later? So I think it sort of trickles away throughout. It goes away throughout the year. And I do believe, I talked about the enforcement actions. I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think people are going to start asking, why aren't you enforcing, as opposed to, surprising the world with enforcement.
I hear it. John, in terms of trying to quantify, the upside from the hemp derivatives ban in your markets.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it very much like Jim. I mean, the illegal markets are not a good thing for anybody. I mean, the untested medicine, the ability for children to get their hands on it are real serious issues. And that's the reason that we do support, just like Jim, the ban of the hemp, but maybe putting better rules in to make this more a level field, because all that does is help bring back our value in our stock, because we're not competing against an extra person that has extra ways around all the rules that we have to follow. That hurts our stock value because we can't compete as easily with these illegal activities happening all over in every state.
That
Doesn't
take
make a
credit cards,
difference.
by the way. They get to take credit cards.
They get to take credit cards. They
They
get to
take
take
credit cards.
they
Yeah.
they get to actually get better loans than us. I mean, they don't have to
Yeah.
borrow this stupid money like we
Yeah.
do from Chicago Atlantic or any of those cannabis lenders at those high interest rates. They got real banking. That's the reason we have to see the level playing field, and this is only the first step of getting that playing field back to level.
Right.
As far whether it makes a difference of a medical or a rec state, I do believe that it is a state by state situation.
Sure.
Massachusetts has had a ban on hemp from day one, unless it was manufactured and grown within the state under the guidelines of the state rules, which had testing and everything else in there. So it's not as easy.
Right.
But it's the ability for these hemp groups to actually ship medicine in sorry, not medicine, but products into our markets,
Right.
which affects everything. So it does affect medical, it does affect the adult use, but I think
Yeah.
that this will help level the playing field, give us back our value of our business, and help in the future raise our stock back up to where it should be. As Jim says, hopefully this does get us to the next level and gets us the ability to use credit cards in more respectable banking.
Right. Anthony, on the same point, trying to quantify
Yeah.
the upside here.
Yeah, infinitely difficult for all the reasons mentioned. Try not to repeat. The fact that you have this delay, how will companies try to push out product and potentially accelerate into the first few months of this, the distribution of what inventory they have before the ban, which could potentially have an adverse impact in the near term for the industry. Will states provide legal frameworks, and do they start operating like the cannabis industry has on a state-by-state basis? And then when I pull back and I just listen to a lot of people talk across this industry, what I've heard most common is that on a state-by-state basis, the impact is 5 to 20% of top line sales for the operators in that particular state. And the reason is because not all of those hemp sales are expected to go back into the state, particularly if you get beverages looped into a definition of hemp sales. Many of those hemp beverages and those customers who are buying at a Total Wine or their local distributor aren't going to make their way back into a dispensary for the hemp beverage. They were purchasing them as a point of sale purchase while they were shopping for liquor or beer. So top line, 5 to 20% is the best info that I've gotten from the industry folks that I talk to, depending on the state.
Yeah, and just staying with you, Anthony, in terms of states' rights issue, I mean, Rand Paul, the way I understand it, he's trying to put through legislation that would make it a states' right issue, right? In the sense that he wants that he's pretty much giving up and pretty much saying, okay, the hemp ban at the federal level will stick, but he wants states' rights to supersede the ban. So let the states have their own hemp rules, make it pretty much like cannabis, right? So
Right.
what he may not know is that most states have put pretty stiff and strict rules for hemp derivatives anyway, right? And we know what happened in Texas, right? It was almost an outright ban. So at the end of the day, it sounds like, he's given up the way I see it, and we're going to end up with something that's going to look like pretty much like cannabis, right? I mean, just I don't know if you guys agree with I know it's a projection we're making 12 months out, but it sounds like he is the one that's giving up, and it doesn't sound like he's on the. And right now, given the attacks the president is making against him, at least on social media, it doesn't seem to me like he's going to have a lot of support from the rest of the GOP. So I mean, I make it sound like it's a done deal. I mean,
keep in mind the fact. No, I'll let Anthony. Sorry, but keep in mind just to clarify one thing Pablo said. Keep in mind that the Ohio just carbon copied what was done in D.C. to ban it basically right away. You know, so the federal government is this is a highly respected, the Ag Committee. We're an agricultural country. This is like a highly respected, big time piece of legislation coming out of like a big time committee, right? All these senators in these farm states stick together and they get stuff done, and it's highly known. So you could go and just take that and just if you're in Pennsylvania, Ohio's already done it. Great leadership.
I don't know if every state is going to be as strict as the federal 0.4 mg per container, but at least it will be a states' rights issue. But again, it will be quite strict at the end of the day anyway. So
yeah,
I think most people.
There are states out there right now that do have hemp laws, and that they're even redefining them more, where they're going to add in more of them reporting into the Cannabis Commission or to the same commissions that the cannabis has to go through, so that they're going to be tested and they're going to put more regulations in. But that's where the competition does remain if it does become a state-run situation.
Right. No, I hear you, of course. Okay, I'll move on to discussion. Before we move on to rescheduling, I'm hearing chatter in the market. Anthony, I'll start with you in terms of a 280E pardon, right? And there's two versions I'm hearing. One, that there's a large MSO out there, and I don't want to call it rumor, right? But it's market chatter, that there's a large MSO out there negotiating pretty much a pardon on those long-term uncertain tax liabilities related to ADE, that pretty much they're going to get a full pardon from the IRS, and they're going to start paying tax like a normal corporation going forward. So that gets totally wiped out. I don't know if you have any views on that. And then there's a second version out there that no, there's no such thing going on, but there is negotiations going on to tackle that debt, to maybe, get a haircut. I don't know how big is a haircut, pay cents on the dollar and structure that debt on a 10, 20-year payment horizon with a low interest rate, and and take it care that way, and take care of it that way, and then start paying going forward as a normal corporation. So it's pretty much you take care of 280E, it goes away even without rescheduling. But Anthony, is this
Yeah.
just wishful thinking? Is this just hearsay? What are you hearing?
So listen, I think it's remote, but when we when we look at questions like this is speculation on speculation. And so
Okay.
let's go to what we know about these agencies. Yeah, federal agencies like the IRS are built around precedent, and they're built around mission, right? What is their mission? It's to collect taxes. I think if the IRS starts rewriting the tax code, they run into risks that they are rewriting what the Congress intended. And we know, particularly under this administration, there's a desire, particularly around tax code, to stay true to what the intent of the tax code necessarily is. And if they wanted changes to it, I think they would have put it in the big, beautiful bill. So hard for me to think that the IRS is trying to give a free pass to an entire industry, particularly in a world where we need as many receipts as possible. Number one. What else do we know? We know that the IRS has indeed worked with companies across all industries that are in distress to collect its tax. I do not think the IRS is in the business of putting people out of business so they can't collect the taxes due. And what we've seen time and again, and with some companies in the cannabis industry over the last few years, they will negotiate with a company that's in financial duress to get them on a payment plan. And sometimes they will even discount it if the burden is too much. So this market chatter could actually be real, because it could be a company in deep distress that's looking to negotiate a deal with the IRS, and the IRS may be sympathetic depending on their financial position and their desire to get paid. But I don't expect that we're going to find some decision where somebody can negotiate some great deal that then everybody else can go and sue the IRS to have application to them, particularly for a business that's federally illegal. And then you could have other illegal businesses going to the IRS for precedent.
I hear you. John, on the same subject, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right up with Anthony. I don't believe that there is any pardon coming for full pardon of any 280E taxes. I do know, and I've worked with the IRS in this industry and many other industries, where you can create payment programs that fit your financial situation for cash flow so that they're not putting businesses out of business. Their role is to collect the money to help the government collect as much as possible. They're very much more willing to talk about penalties and interest being forgiven or renegotiated, but not really the taxes. So the 280E pardon, I don't believe will happen, but I do believe that they will work with any company, including the cannabis industry, to create payment plans to help get out of the hole that they put us into. This 280E is a serious subject that has been a real thorn, and I've been in this industry since 2008, and I've seen it all. I mean, this you have these startups that think that this is easy, and then you get that 280 tax bill when you're losing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and you have to pay taxes on your COGS. It's not a fun time. But I do know that the government does work out payment programs, and they'll continue to do that. The government's not here to put everybody out of business. They want to keep you paying so that they can collect as much money as possible.
John, but before I go to Jim, but okay, workout plan, yes, payment plan, yes, but no haircut.
They'll not really discount, I don't think, on your tax returns unless you have a solid argument of why certain line items shouldn't be included in the 280E. You know, it's something we've been audited in the past at least three, four times, and we have never had any changes needed to any of our returns during those years. But the fact is that we made arguments of why those shouldn't be included in 280, and we were able to win that argument. So I do believe that if people take the time and make the appropriate arguments, they can get the government to agree with how they filed.
Got it. Jim, Any thoughts on this point?
Yeah, I mean, that last point's a big point, right? Because a lot of companies, including Jushi, TrueLeave would be a big one. But I think we were at the forefront with TrueLeave in getting high quality tax opinions that have that really make more of a tax dispute as opposed to a tax liability. We never file tax return saying we owe 280E because we don't believe it's appropriate. And so I think there's a whole nother argument. I think Jon's company started as more of a real estate management company. They had a whole different angle on it, as I recall, MariMed. But we were always, we were a business development company, investment company that turned into a cannabis company. And yes, interest and penalties, I mean, that's one bucket, and it's all on the balance sheets of the companies, at least on ours, and I would imagine all of them. And then the second bucket's medical, which it's hard to say you should charge 280 for lots of reasons. The federal government actually does many things out there to promote the medical business in research and stuff like that in Louisiana. And there's all kinds of different reasons why you can't pick and choose, and then the adult use side of it is the third bucket. So that's how we think of it. And I do disagree a little bit with what Jon said and Anthony said about I just think different experience, right? So we were out in California, and thankfully we could never get dispensary deals done because the dispensary owners took out a lot of cash in the business every year, and they didn't pay their 280E taxes, and then they would negotiate with the federal government and could pay like 25 cents on the dollar. We happen to know this because we did due diligence on them. This was going on 7-8 years ago. 9 years, this is how it was done. This is how they did it. They were the first legal market, and this is how they were able to run businesses. They just didn't pay it. They own 1 or 2 stores, and so there's this huge precedent out there. Then there's a public company that you might be able to get this, all the documents from still. That's gone. I think it's been restructured a couple times, but there was a public filing by this company. It was statewide. It's a big company.
State House did it. They announced their settlement with the IRS for a fraction of their tax.
If you run it, it's like 11 cents on the dollar or something like that. So there is absolutely examples, and they didn't have letters. They weren't disputing it in any kind of sophisticated way, And if you talk to people who left the IRS, they'll tell you, you guys never had anybody going there that was sophisticated. This, it's a dispute. It just really is not clear that this applies. Period. And that's what these letters are about. And that's what the companies are all relying on. There's only one company actually paying the 280E, and everybody else is relying on this. So I think it would be a really big fight, and the IRS is busy. And it seems awful, awful 1970s or 1980s or to go after the legal cannabis industry in this way. I mean, it just seems awful. I mean, we're the guys who got attacked by this loophole in the hemp bill by a massive legal industry that includes Mexicans and Chinese and all kinds of interstate stuff going on that wasn't supposed to be legal. And we've raised money and we put our own money into it. I mean, this is crazy. It really is a persecuted industry, and this is a way to keep the persecution going. I know that sounds, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to say that. So it's just wrong. It doesn't apply, and there's going to be a huge fight, and that's what everybody is telling you. Right? I mean, everybody in their financial statements, just read the financial statements. They're tax disputes, and the government has a history of settling. At pennies on the dollar, period.
Look, I mean,
that's the president.
Let me ask you a question here, and I look. I mean, this may seem maybe out of place, and maybe it's a stupid question, but I mean, strategically, if this is a president that's pardoning, and he has a right to do so, right? Pardoning, and he of course he has a right to do so, to pardon convicted criminals because he has a right to do so. Isn't this the right time for the industry to ask for a pardon on this? Unfair, unjust.
I don't pay attention to market chatter when I invest on behalf of one of these capital advisors, which is a large hedge fund in the space, and I don't pay attention to market chatter when I manage Jushi, right, as chairman CEO. So I know nothing about this, but you only get pardoned historically if you actually been convicted. Nobody's been convicted here, so I don't think think a pardon actually applies just in this legal setting. It would be this futuristic pardon, like Biden pardoned his son when he, left government, so he couldn't be prosecuted. I think he did, right? Did he pardon his son, Anthony? I forget. But
I don't remember.
I think they started prospective pardoning in the Biden administration, if I recall.
Yeah.
So I think this would be like a prospective pardon.
Right. So it's not a pardon. Maybe pardon is not the right term, but it's like
yeah. So, but listen, we'll see. I will say if rescheduling happens and it goes from, which is the most likely case, it's not descheduling, but rescheduling from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Trump talks about medical's okay, and there's been a lot of stuff in the Wall Street Journal about Thanksgiving and other fine publications saying, people can't get through the family dinners without cannabis, because there's a lot of stress around holidays, and they build up anxiety. It's in the Wall Street Journal, I think, over the weekend. So, but if you look at this, it's going to be really hard. I mean, you've been settling from 11 to 11 cents on the dollar. You've been settling for 20 years. How could we have letters saying, hey, tax opinions saying we did nothing wrong? So interest and penalty is completely out the window. Medical has been legal in it's legal in 40 states. I mean, it's an uphill battle. It's just a question of people have the fight in them.
Right. Anyway, let's move on to the next section. Okay, so let's talk about rescheduling. But just a short answer on this. I'll start with you, Jim.
I think it's an uphill battle for the IRS. I want to be clear on that. It's an uphill battle for them.
Right. No, I hear you. Thank you. No, very clear.
Okay.
Just moving on to a subject of rescheduling. I'll stay with you, Jim, but short answers from everyone. So most MSO CEOs say the president is a man of his word, promises made, promises kept, but a few weeks has become 3 months, right? Any views on the delays? I'll start with you, Jim, but just a short answer.
I have and nothing to add on this.
Okay, that's fine. Anthony?
It's a political decision, in my opinion. Whenever they view it to be politically expedient is when it'll happen. I think the 3 weeks, we have to remember, he was thrown on the spot and he just talked off the top of his head and everybody really believed. And even if Pam Bondi thought, wow, he's out of his mind, it's really 6 months away, was she really going to step to the podium and say, no, Mr. President, you're wrong, it's really 6 months? And there's no reason for her to correct the record. So, we all took that and ran with it as an industry. I think it's whenever it's politically expedient, that's when they'll complete the process. And I do believe it'll get completed.
Right. John, just a short answer. Any views on the delays?
And I'm pretty much with Anthony. I've always said that the government can't get out of their own way. It's just, I think they want to get this done. It's just, they just can't figure out the right time with the economic factors that are going on, getting the government reopened. Now it's time to start really getting some business done. So matter of time, and can't say when.
Let me add one thing, Pablo. I know you want to move quickly, but I personally believe this is also aligned with a law and order agenda. I think when you step back and you look at what this government's doing with Mexican cartels, South American cartels, Chinese cartels, and you look at what was happening in Maine and Susan Collins exposing what was going on in Maine with illegal Chinese marijuana farms, I do think that there's a broader impact here. Now, I could be optimistic and say I hope they'll come with a real regulatory overview. I don't think it'll happen that way, but I think there's more than just rescheduling happening. I think it's tied into some other efforts that they have in the administration around law and order.
Right.
And I think that's part of the hemp bill issue also, is that they legalized hemp and they never thought about what should the rules be. And they don't want to make that mistake, and that's why people have been delaying on the rescheduling. I think they got to get things all in order because it needs to be done right. Now that they've redone this whole hemp thing, now hopefully they can do both at the same time and do it right.
Because apparently that some of that illegal cannabis from Maine, right, was getting COAs being labeled as hemp and being sold in smoke shops, right? So that's why we have these new rules on cannabis being found on federal.
That was a very small part of what was going on. I mean, that was going on everywhere.
Yeah.
I bought major brands in New York City a few years ago, and illegal. I mean, like every brand was there. I mean, it was absolutely the same thing you got from California. I mean, there's wide distribution of illegal marijuana product throughout the country through tons of distribution channels. Hemp made it easy.
Yeah. Look, just staying with the subject of rescheduling, and at the recent Ignite conference in DC, and no one asked you to speak for Kim Rivers, but she said, and then she also posted in X. She used a very specific term, and I think she was pretty much quoting the president or her staff or his staff. She said something like, "The president and his staff want to reschedule medical cannabis." Right? She would have said, the president wants to reschedule cannabis, but she says wants to reschedule medical cannabis. Maybe I'm making, too much of it. But in your opinion, Jim, I'll start with you. What does this mean exactly? Does it mean rescheduling all marijuana, recreational and medical, or just medical? If
So
all, why say reschedule medical cannabis? Or am I just wasting my time here? Wasting your
yeah,
time
I
here.
think you're getting caught up in the thing. This is my understanding. It sounds like Anthony's going to be able to be the most chapter and verse on this. He sounds like a wonderful spokesman on these level of details. He dresses well and he's well coiffed. And I think I like Anthony on this. I'm going to turn it to him, but I will say I believe my overarching as an investor. Cannabis, if it's Schedule 3 is okay, right? It's that's the whole point of what Schedule 3 is, right? And then as far as taxes go, if it's legal in one area, 280 doesn't apply in any areas. That's how the 280E jumps over, right? So and that's my feel. I'm not giving you chapter and verse. I don't think your audience really can understand it and at this point, but you can go look at this, you can go do the research. The research has to do with Schedule 3 is a medical concept saying there is a medical use for this, which it's clear, right? And then because it's used medically, that means 280 that does not apply anywhere in the industry, right? And then on top of that, it's a big normalization. We've talked to a lot of politicians in states say once 280 happens and there's a tip of the hat from the federal government, we're going to look at things differently. And it's just the beginning. I think I know people don't talk about the Climb Act and the Banking Act, but it's momentum could start building for the industry. Yeah, Anthony, why don't you take us through chapter and verse?
Well, sure. I'll give you my two points on my perspective on this. Number one, and Pablo, you've had some of these experts on podcasts before. What I hear from the experts is it's a plant, it's a single molecule, and the way the Controlled Substances Act is designed, you're either on a schedule or off a schedule, and you can't have the same molecule on different schedules. And so that seemed a pretty reasonable position. And so I'll go with that and maybe defer to some of your experts that have weighed in before that. Again, I believe they say you can't just bifurcate medical and adult use. It's the same plant, same molecule. The second point is around how one would talk to the administration and lobbying the administration. This president has consistently emphasized that he's heard wonderful things about medical cannabis. And in a world where you have politicians talking about hemp and talking about THC intoxicants in an unregulated and recreational manner, and that's being talked about negatively. From a policy perspective, it would seem to make sense, and there's speculation in my commentary, but it would seem to make sense if I'm having a talk in Washington, D.C., and probably meeting with policymakers around this topic, I would continually use the jargon medical cannabis, medical cannabis, medical cannabis as I'm lobbying for reform, because it's probably easier to get policymakers on board with a medical cannabis approach rather than saying cannabis in general and having people make that leap or assumption that you're talking about recreational intoxicants.
John, any views on the bifurcation thing?
And I agree with what Jim and Anthony were saying. I mean, I think the president, I did read it in the newspaper that he did say medical cannabis. And I've been around in this industry for so long, I still refer to patients in medical a lot of times by accident, even though it is adult use in many states. But the fact is, it's much easier for people to understand the word medical cannabis, as Anthony was just saying. So if I was talking in Washington, I probably would use the medical, which gets them more apt to understand that there's benefits for people and it's not just a party drug.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying we had Irwin Simon last week in our Zoom here. I'm not saying he's right? And of course, he was making the argument that they would legalize reschedule medical cannabis, which to him, it means that they would federally legalize medical cannabis. It would be sold in pharmacies. It would be prescribed by doctors, regulated by the FDA, and they would leave recreational to the states as it is right now, right? So it's a very different view, but of course it's his view, right? I don't think that's
He has a
most
big
of us
he
are
has a big
thinking.
hemp
It's a
business,
big
doesn't
change,
he?
right?
He has a big hemp business, doesn't he?
But
Well,
is that, hold on,
no,
is that a
You ask?
different view? I don't know that that's a different view.
that's a different view because it's
I think he described the legal realities of what rescheduling is, right? Let's
right, but
talk
it's
about it.
different.
Rescheduling doesn't legalize marijuana.
No,
Rescheduling
well,
says there's accepted medical. Go ahead.
right, no. What he said was that in his opinion, it would be sold at pharmacies. It would be prescribed by doctors, right? Prescribed RX, right? Which means it's not just a recommendation, right?
So
So it
he's saying
changes the
that not only
model.
the infrastructure is in place, he's saying that the actual prescribing of medical cannabis would shift from the current infrastructure into a pharmacy infrastructure.
Right, and it would be prescribed by doctors in terms of an RX prescription, not just a recommendation. So
But
it's the German model, it's the Australian model. It's a very different business model. It's not the one that we have in place right now.
I
So
would say
it would
good
not.
luck with
But
that.
again, it's a whole different
That
ball
sounds
game.
like maybe the 2040s.
Yeah,
Right.
I hear you. I
think
hear
that's
you.
a
I'm
good
just
business
saying,
plan for the
but I'm not
2040s.
saying it works for them. It works for those companies, right? They have
Yeah.
but I hear you. I'm not
I
saying
would be speaking
I
about that
believe.
too if I had a different asset base.
Yeah.
But
but,
that's a 2035, 2040, 45 kind of deal.
Yeah,
but
I
was he
hear you.
talking about rescheduling or the legalization
Well,
No,
of
he
that's the
said
cannabis
way.
for
it
That's
medical?
the way.
basically
That's the way they interpret that's their interpretation of what rescheduling medical cannabis means. But again, that's their interpretation.
so he's going to go to
It's very
Walgreens.
different.
He's going to get distribution for marijuana at Walgreens.
Right, it would be
Yes,
interstate trade.
that what's
Interstate
going to go
trade.
on?
Right. I agree. I hear
Yeah,
you. I
that's
hear
good.
you.
That's yeah.
I
Good
know.
luck.
I know. I hear you, Jim. I
Yeah.
hear you. All right. Let's move back to it. Just finishing up with
Yeah,
rescheduling.
I think some of the industry participants just sued Total Wine and also DoorDash
Yeah, it
because they
starts with a J. The
were
company starts
illegal
with a J,
products in
right?
Virginia. Yeah, there
The
was a
company
yeah,
starts with a J. Yeah.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
crystal ball question. I'll start with you, John. Crystal ball question. Probability we get rescheduling as is proposed, right? Regardless of its shape, probability we get rescheduling before or by November 26, and then your best estimate of when exactly. Crystal ball question.
Well, I do have a high hope that it would happen before November of 26. I won't
What?
put a crystal ball of when,
Okay.
as we've already discussed that Anthony and I both just said you can never predict when it's going to happen,
Okay.
but I do believe it will happen. I'm very comfortable it will happen before November of 26.
Okay. You want to put a probability number?
Who me or John?
No,
Anthony?
John. John, do you want to put a number?
No, I won't put a
Okay.
probability number.
Okay.
I'm just very high
Anthony.
on it. I do
Okay.
feel
Okay.
it is
High.
going to happen.
No, that's good. Very high. That's good. Anthony.
This administration certainly sends all the signals. I'm not going to give you an answer because I'm not going to give you a probability. This administration absolutely has sent the signals that they're going to be the ones that do it. I do believe it ultimately happens because you have the will of the people on your side, which is super important in this country, and that will come back around to the politics of it. And the data is there, and the medical efficacy is there, saying that this needs to be regulated, needs to come out of the dark ages. So I'm optimistic it'll happen. I hope that it happens by November of 26, and I am not going to predict.
Okay. Jim, again, it's a crystal ball question, but
Yeah. My crystal ball's been broken for 8 years because I thought it'd be a lot easier, and I'm in this this war for a long time trying to work with the federal government and some of these states that move slowly. But I would say, listen, this is how I look at it from One East Capital Advisors' perspective. What's the probability that the market's saying that it's going to happen by November 26th? I think it's closer to 0 than it is to 50%. So I don't know if it's 10 or 15. I don't know what the poly market is. For the end of the year, it's like below 10%, but end of this year. But I don't know what it is for next year. But I'd look at that. If again, I don't do this is not how I invest. I invest for the long term. So if it's closer to 0, let's just say 20% or something like that in the market, and the stocks are really cheap on a fundamental basis, and they have this ability not to pay 280 anyway. I think it's 100% that it's going to happen sooner or later, right? So I think if you believe it's 50-50, the stocks are a buy. You believe it's 75-65, it's a buy. If you believe, because some people believe it's in the 90s, obviously it's a screaming. So I would say that's the way people should think about it, as opposed to thinking they know something. I should look at it as what the market believes, what's in the stock prices.
Right. Look, I'm going to ask you a question here. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but if we try to think of the president's inner circle, which are names that would come to mind that are, in favor of this rescheduling and which are obviously against, right? Like I would say in favor, Susie Wiles, Roger Stone, if we can put him in the inner circle. I don't know if we would put Matt Gaetz in the inner circle, even though they are not inside the White House. Maybe definitely against Stephen Miller. But would you guys want to comment on some of these things publicly in this forum?
I'll take a shot. I'm not going to name names. I don't know enough about the inner workings of the individuals in this administration, but whoever would be in the for camp and whoever's in the against camp, I believe that their motivations are more political than it is altruistic and aligned with this particular industry. I make no illusion that there is a champion that's close to the president who is fighting day in and day out to allow veterans access to safe, legal cannabis to treat. I just don't believe there's anybody that's close that's fighting that and saying it's a top 5 priority. I think the people around the president are most likely looking at this politically, and probably say there's a real reason to move here when you look at the demographics of support. And that brings me again back to my answer I've used a couple of times. I think this is all political from a DC perspective, and it'll happen on that type of a timeline, a politically expedient timeline for the party in power.
Right.
That's a good answer. That's a very good answer. I would note that in the opinion polls, I think President Trump does pay attention to opinion polls, and the opinion polls are clearly behind this. And it's not a blue state, red state issue. I mean, in red states, they're clearly behind this. You had the vote in Florida, 57%, with the governor actively and dishonestly going against it. Actively and dishonestly, and he was taking money that he shouldn't have. There's all kinds of things that were going wrong in this, and they still had 57% of the vote in Florida. Arizona years ago was 55, or the second vote, or so whatever it was. It got over 60, I guess, the second time. Because, but like, I mean, that's the game, and they need to win elections. And it's a popular issue, and why would you go against it? What's the point of going against it? So that's how I think about it. And I think Scott Bessent may be for it, because I think when you go to Schedule 3, don't you get like 500,000 jobs or something like that pop into the job market? That'd be nice to have before the election. Anthony, have you heard this theory of the 500,000 or so jobs?
Yeah, we've looked into it. Some of the jobs data comes in from the state insurance fund, so it really depends how many jobs the states are reporting in. There's probably going to be a boost. I don't know if it's everybody that gets into that Fed data, but there's definitely going to be a boost. It won't be everybody. There's a large proportion that's already included in it through those state insurance fund representation.
Got it.
Yeah, but there's also the research and development. That's where a lot of the jobs are going to come from, is people being able to go in and properly do the research
Well, those
on
are new
cannabis.
jobs. We're talking about existing.
Those are the new jobs.
Yeah. Those are new jobs. Yeah, I do believe there'll be new jobs. You'll have investment it is kind of invest in America too.
John, any comments on the inner circle question? Any comments on or
Well, I was agreeing a lot with Jim about the fact that the president is really listening to the people, and how the polls are telling him people are pushing. I mean, I was going to bring up the Florida vote also, about the fact that if it wasn't for a supermajority need, I mean, that would have been a great win for Florida. And it just shows in every state that they've had votes is more than 55% of people supporting cannabis in some shape or form. And that's what the president is paying attention. But he also is very much into social media. And most of the younger people today are very much in for the legalization of cannabis.
Right.
2 points, Pablo, I'd like to quickly add just around the politics of this. and the popular support. Number one, if you look at Kentucky this past November, or a year ago, I should say, at the ballot box, Kentuckians had the opportunity to opt out of having medical cannabis available in their communities or businesses located in their communities. I'll get the number wrong, but directionally, I think there were 107 communities that went on the ballot, and every single one of them did not or voted in support of medical cannabis. So you think about a deep red state like Kentucky at the community level voting in support of having access, their community having medical cannabis businesses in them. I think that's significant. And I think that's the type of political data that people see. And then the other point is, let's not forget that Missouri and Ohio are red states, and both passed those particular states, and the legislators in those states aren't paying a political price for it. So those are two, I think, important bellwether data points for the GOP. I'm sorry, and then one quick third
those
point.
are three, by the way: Missouri, Ohio, and
Missouri, right? And then if you go back to this summer and you look at all the social media testing that occurred with influencers that are favorable to this president, there was significant support in social media for people saying, I support at Donald Trump and at Mike Tyson in rescheduling cannabis. And so I think those trial balloons occurred in the summer of 25. And again, I think politically people recognize that. And it just fuels my optimism that this will ultimately happen.
Right.
I'd like to point out in the Florida vote, because I live in Florida, that it was the most people that I've talked to, and kind of is well known in the press and even the industry, thinks they've made a mistake. I've talked to some of the industry participants. They made a mistake. Is one issue that resonated with voters when they still only got 43% was the having cannabis smell on the streets, right? Because everybody goes to New York City, and New York City is like that, and if not, you go to LA or whatever, right? But that's a law enforcement issue. The industry didn't handle that right. Like it doesn't exist in Florida now as a medical market. I live there. I mean, nobody's smoking cannabis on the streets because the law actually cares about it in the communities, that I'm in, which is the most populated communities on the Southeast coast. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, the most populated communities. None of those do you have much cannabis. I mean, maybe sometime late at night in Miami, who knows? I'm not there at that point, but not during the daytime, or the evening dinner time. So I think that it's a law enforcement issue, and people, and so I think the Florida vote's hugely positive for public opinion.
Okay. Look, just a few. I mean, I know we're running out of time, but just a few questions left in terms of potential catalyst. In terms of uplisting, or just one question, you have Glasshouse in Robinhood, that's not uplisting, but could we see more MSO stocks in Robinhood? I know that's separate from uplisting, but any thoughts on that? Anyone answer, just a short, quick answer? Or was that just a one-off? Could we see Green Thumb, Curaleaf?
I have no knowledge. I mean, I would imagine some of the bigger companies are looking into it, but at Jushi, we're not focused on this.
Okay. About getting, listed in NASDAQ, anyone lobbying the SEC, or that's not going to happen as long as cannabis remains federally illegal?
I think the game plan is Schedule 3, and then let's worry about that on the other side. That's what.
Well, the Schedule 3 doesn't mean you're going to get onto the big board either, and that's the frustration, is getting them comfortable that it's just like any other drug manufacturer. My question's always been, how can these drug manufacturers that are producing stuff that is on Schedule 1 plus things on Schedule 2 and 3, why are they allowed to be public companies and we can't be? Because we're just in Schedule 1.
Right. Well, I mean, go on.
So, Don, I would say that I believe the industry, just to echo what you're saying, it's sort of building on it real quick, Pablo. So there are industry participants who are very talented and put money at things and have good groups and stuff. One of their things they're fighting for is safer and climb, and like it's still out there, but it's out there in a way to coincide with what's going on with Schedule 3. So I think when I said it begins with Schedule 3, if Schedule 3 happens, then you're going to see the focus shift to those kinds of things. And so I think it's kind of like a domino kind of thing. Right. It's how people are.
Crawl, walk,
thank you.
Cascade effect, right? Cascade effect.
Yeah.
Any room or logic for cannabis and hemp to work together this year? It doesn't sound like it would make sense. I mean, for
We've
the
been very
regulated cannabis industry to work together right now. I mean,
we've
things
been
are
very active in hemp. So you know, we've been suing a lot of people, and we've also
right.
been very
Yeah.
active. You know, we were very active in DC for this ag bill that got passed.
Yeah, I mean,
closing
look, I
the
mean,
loophole.
I'm just,
And
I'm
I
sorry
would
to interrupt
say,
you, Jim,
I
but
would,
can I,
I
Jim,
would say,
hold on one second. I mean,
the vote today.
there's an op-ed today in Marijuana Moment about someone writing about, you know, making progress about cannabis and hemp people working together, right? But on the other hand, I'm hearing you and a lot of other people that, no, I mean, you're working against each
But
other.
I think
I'm
you
not
have
saying anything, but it doesn't
no,
sound like
but
there's.
all right, let me, because I know you have some hemp clients, and let me, there's intoxicating hemp, and
Right.
then there's industrial hemp, there's CBD hemp, right? So
Right.
you can't classify the hemp in all one bucket. There's kind of like 280E, there's 3 buckets,
Yes.
right? And the industrial hemp folks, you know, never liked what was going on, and there's people out there doing it correctly, you know, in the hemp business. Of course, not everybody's a bad actor, right? But the bad actors, they're very disorganized. The ship has sailed. That's the intoxicating hemp industry. And they had a loophole. They built a business. They raised money, you know, and people should have done their due diligence. And that I mean, it's a 74-23 vote or whatever the hell it was. I mean, it was over, you know, 3/4 of the Senate. I mean, it wasn't just, Anthony, you said it was, you know, getting a funding bill done. I mean, you know, and I would look at, by the way, people want to look at that as negative for THC. As somebody who was in the process and helped and spending money, we educated so many people about the benefits of cannabis and the benefits of regulated industry, the age verification, the testing, right? You know, you know, they love that stuff. They didn't understand that stuff. So there's a whole slew of people. I'm not saying that they've all of a sudden gotten positive on medical cannabis, but I'm saying like now they're kind of in the game to think about it, because so that's a people underrate the education process and what getting successful legislation through. And it was the legal, you know, state regulated cannabis industry that was really kind of pushing for this. That was a win. That was a win. And they respect us more. They understand the age verification. They understand it's like a freight train that's left the station. You don't want to get on the train tracks, because sooner or later you're going to get run over by it. That's what you know, medical cannabis is. Everybody's voting for it, you know. So,
Well, I guess the real question is, Pablo, THC is THC. Just like Jim's saying, we need the testing, we need the regulations, we need the age verifications, we need to get the illegal off the street. For them to be in the same industry as us and to work together would mean that they would have to follow the same rules that we follow. How many of those companies are going to stay doing THC and hemp when THC has all these rules that limit you, and those limitations are very expensive? You won't. I think the real question is, will the hemp people stay in THC if they have to follow our rules?
Right.
and also, John, that's a good point. And will the states let them? The states have something to say.
Yes.
That. So they don't want you know, kids getting it in the smoke shop, and then they get some nitrous oxide on top of that.
Yeah, quick question. I mean, of course, I mean, it's tough getting rescheduling done. The probability of getting descheduling done or before November 26th, 0.
D, as in like
Descheduling.
off the schedule completely.
Yeah,
Bro, you're smoking all your
0,
clients'
0.
stuff. I
Yeah,
mean,
0.
no
Too many samples. Too many
way.
samples. Too many
In
samples.
no, like I can't
Yeah.
even imagine.
Yeah, we
Unless
got
I
to
had some
stop talking
letters.
about that. It makes us look like that's
Yeah.
not something people
Not
should
gonna
talk.
happen. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No.
The takeaway here is the hemp stuff is dead. Descheduling never should have been on the discussion. And 280E is a fight. But you know, it's an uphill battle from the government, and rescheduling is going to happen eventually.
All
And the
right.
stock market, just to wrap it up, the stock market's putting 0 in for rescheduling, closer to 0. I shouldn't say 0 because you don't know,
Okay.
but closer
Okay,
to
good.
0 than
Okay.
50.
Okay, look, I know we probably didn't cover everything we wanted to, but we're out of time here. So closing remarks, I'll start with you, Anthony. But again, thank you to our panelists. I know that there's a lot to cover here, but again, our view is that there are great positive catalysts. And I guess before we finish, I'm going to ask one question here, and I'm sorry that we're going over the hour. In my opinion, even if we don't get rescheduling, you already have this ban on hemp derivatives that, in my opinion, is going to stick, given that Rand Paul is asking, wants to get a law passed that, makes it a states' rights issue that says, federally, make it illegally at the federal level, and let states decide. Most states are imposing bans anyway or very strict rules. So that's already a huge win for the regulated cannabis industry. You have that win. And then what if you can get some type of, I don't want to call it a 280E pardon or some IRS rule that even without rescheduling, 280E doesn't apply. It gets a change on the tax code. And then we get rescheduling later. That would still be two big wins for the industry, right? Or you think that's very unlikely? Just a short answer before we go to closing remarks. Jim, or you think that's unlikely?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we beat this one up. Again, I said it. I think the industry is doing great. Even they're very organized on the rescheduling front. I've never seen the industry, the cannabis industry, the state-regulated cannabis industry. I've never seen them so, organized, and on this federal level. This ag bill was hugely positive for the state-regulated business. Reducing the illegal markets is great. Rescheduling, 100% it's going to happen. The question is when. It could be 2028, by the way, in the 100%, but it's 100% it's going to happen. So, and then you have to start looking at the state catalysts too. There's Florida that affects some big ones. New governor there.
Virginia.
You should speak to that governor. There's Virginia for us, new governor. Passing this, the legislatures twice, and of course there's Pennsylvania, which has been, slogging along, but it's still not, it's still going to happen, but the question's when.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of catalysts.
All right. Anyway, okay. Closing remarks, Anthony. Start with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So first off, Jon, Jim, thank you guys. This has been terrific. Pablo, thank you for having me. There's just so much information to digest in this industry, and we've covered so many bases here. But it brings me back to the way people approach this industry. I think people should decide if they're trading this industry or investing in this industry. And I think there's different approaches depending on what your answer is. If you've got the liquidity and you've got the time to wait out the volatility, I think what people have heard here today is we're all firmly entrenched in the belief that reform will occur. But I think you also heard very loudly, nobody can reliably predict when it is. So if you're an investor, this is an opportunity to find companies that have the staying power, that will be here years from now, that they have the balance sheet and the runway and the cash flow profile to have staying power to be here for years to come. And then you'll benefit as an investor. And if you're a trader, you're going to love the volatility of what happens in between. So here at NewLake, we're long-term investors in this sector. So we believe it'll happen.
Thank you, Anthony. Jon, closing remarks.
Yeah, well, I want to thank all of you for today's panel. It's been a lot of fun, but I think that there were some really good points made. I mean, Jim brought a lot of points up about stock and how the value of stock is looking at the rescheduling. Right now, it is at zero, which forces the price of everybody's stock down even more. The people are looking at the tax issue with the 280E, which is part of that rescheduling. So people are looking at the balance sheet and income statements of all the tax liabilities we all have. And I think that makes some people unknowledgeable of what it really means. And I think that's part of the reason that the stock market is so far down. And I think that with any type of rumor or schedule of when they'll vote on rescheduling, will make all the stocks jump back up. But I think it's really the fact is, and I'm happy Jim's out there saying that his group is buying a lot of companies, because I think this is a great opportunity for investors to understand. Buy now, but hold. This isn't the environment to do these day trades where you dump them and hope that you make a little money. There's some great opportunities with what's going on between the 280, the rescheduling, and the hemp bill that are really going to help each of the values of all of our stocks increase. And I see in the long term, there's a big value for an investor in that asset.
Thank you, Jon. Jim, closing remarks.
I think, thank you to the panelists and you, Pablo. So I think those are great comments about sort of the industry and where it's headed. I made some comments earlier, but, in terms of company specific stuff, for Jushi, as an example, and there's other examples of Florida guys, for example, and everybody gets affected by Pennsylvania virtually, but you have state level catalysts in Virginia. There's 5 companies, including us. There's in Pennsylvania, there's almost everybody, including us, in a big way. So those are catalysts. There's Florida catalysts for other folks. So look at the state level catalysts, and also look at companies. There's a few companies that can benefit through consolidation being consolidators or consolidatees. But let's I talk about consolidators. I think Jushi could be in that category. Nobody actually puts anything for that, right? It's like that's like a blue sky. It's not even blue sky. It's like going to Mars on Elon Musk's vehicle. It's like space level kind of blue skies. But there are not going to be many folks who have the capability to, from balance sheet perspective, the management perspective, the cash flow perspective, and also if you look at being able to consolidate assets that they don't already own. So, for example, if you look at a big company, the biggest is Curaleaf, right? That in terms of their presence, how many more states can they acquire? Very, very limited. Now, there's still some, and they're still active in it. But if you look at a company like Jushi or TerraSend, very, very different, right? And so I think there's going to be these consolidation plays. So I would say look at the state level stuff, look at the companies, look at the management team. If you're going to look at 280E, it's a tax dispute. And you have to sort of say, does the management team have sophistication to get the right tax opinions, to fight the fight, and to minimize the potential liability? Keeping in mind, it could be zero. There could be like a tax pardon. Like I think it's, not vernacular, not a tax pardon, but there could be some crazy thing that happens to the positive. I think it's closer to 0% right now, than 50, in terms of my credit I give it to it as an investor. But there's stuff out there like that, all these options that could happen to the positive. So I think people should do their work and be long-term, like everybody is saying. Trading is like, if you're going to trade, be professional in this industry. Don't do it as a sideline.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists, and thanks everyone for joining. That joined via Zoom and via X and Restream. Everyone, have a good day and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Happy
Pablo.
Thanksgiving.